Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about work and family. And again, to introduce this chapter, we have to be thinking about several variables. And the book, as a major theme, has been talking about the association between the family, the market, and the state. And another way of breaking that down, again, is to think about the major institutions of society, of which the family is. And so all the institutions in society are interrelated and they all contribute to the functioning of the overall society. But then all these institutions in society also affect each other and are associated with each other. For example, what happens when the economy crashes to the family and the family structure, for example? Does that impose stress upon families? And then how does stress on families affect all kinds of things, such as children's welfare, relationship quality, things along those lines? So again, the book uses the state and the market to refer to government and politics in the military, political power, and then also the economy and, all the facets of the economy, and then one of which is work. And that's why it's titled Work and Families. But again, you have to be thinking about the association between economics and family, the workforce and family, historical time periods, and how capitalism is associated with changing family dynamics, for example, rise in technology, rise in health, people living longer, people staying in the workforce longer. Again, there is just so many things to be thinking about with this chapter. But again, that coining that idea of what's the association between the family, the state, and the market is a pretty good approach to thinking about how things like socioeconomic status and access to the workforce and overall life chances, and then the type of government you live under, the type of culture you live under, the political system you live under, and how all of these facets affect the family, okay? So again, the book introduces family in the social context by really stressing the association between socioeconomic status and the family. Again, the association between the family, the market, and the state. Capitalism has expanded. As a result of capitalism, people have migrated from the farms and worked their ways into urban areas over the last 200 years since the Industrial Revolution. And again, we've talked several times about the association between the family and the rise of capitalism and how that has changed family dynamics over time, and how that has affected families depending upon their overall socioeconomic status in a capitalist class system within which your social location, where you're located compared to other people, and your overall life chances are then associated with your socioeconomic status. So again, in modern times, only 2% of people are living on the farms, for example. And even the farmers, of course, are at the mercy to the state and the market based upon state and federal policies along with the economic swings, okay? But essentially, we live in a postmodern, meaning even in our country, we don't even create that much stuff. We're a post-industrial society within which all of our factory jobs and things along those lines have been sold off to countries where labor is cheaper. So in America, you see a high level of white-collar jobs compared to blue-collar jobs. And again, that's the association between how do you get a white-collar job. And again, it's education plus job prestige plus wealth. And this is how you rise up to socioeconomic status. So, educational attainment, for example, and job prestige is absolutely associated with the overall welfare of families. And so again, I put in here this idea of the physical and social environment and how that influences the family, because you have to think about the family at different times. Like the book talks about, it opens up this chapter with Mary Ingalls Wilder and Little House on the Prairie, right? And what would family life be like back then? And then here in modern times where everybody had to, instead of working on the farm for subsistence, for example, we're now selling our labor to make some capital in order to be able to pay for our family. And in order to do that, we need a specialization or a job, for example, to be able to acquire the capital to take care of our families, unless we are the bourgeoisie, the owners, okay? And so again, the social context you have to think about it over hundreds of years. And historically, as people were moving into these jobs, more men were working than females. But over the last, 50, 60 years, you've seen this mass migration of females going into the workforce to now in modern times, men and women pretty much work just about the same amount. Now, this has many consequences. This addition of females to the workforce, the, migration of all people to the cities in this capitalist society in which we now have to sell our labor in order to be able to survive. But at the same time, this also gives us our personal independence and a sense of identity because, our ability to enter the workforce and to be able to sell our labor and to be able to acquire skills and to be able to make money for our family and to identify with our work and identify with our culture. A lot of that has to do with the social context which you live. And so to finalize the introduction to this chapter, again, the conflict between work and family is increasing in modern times. And a lot of this has to do with that, and when it comes to the family, you have more two-parent working households, single parents that have to work, and that might take away from their time with their family. You're thinking about all these factors that the family is associated with, economics, with this chapter. And again, all of us in a capitalist society have to sell our labor unless we're the bourgeoisie. And even the bourgeoisie in some form is probably doing some of that also. But again, you're starting to see this rise in conflict between work and family because we have to go out and sell our labor. We have to be away from our family. We need childcare. We need preschools, things along those lines to be able to take care of it. And again, that's the association between the state, because of the economy of which we have to sell our labor. If we aren't helped out by, some state policies and support, preschools, access to things like that, how does that affect the family? And so there's just so much going on in this chapter. This is a general introduction. It would take hours to talk about all these great contexts. But again, we're just looking at that association between the family, economics, the workforce, and then the inclusion of the state policies, or the government and federal government policies. So work in institutional areas. Work, the book defines as any effort. Okay, and they break it down into care work, which is face-to-face work to enhance another's well-being. And then we have housework, which is doing all the household functions. And then we have market work. Again, is going out and working for pay or having to sell our labor to get capital in order to take care of our families. And then there's the system of care, which is a cultural system for care work and housework. So it helps a little bit to know a little bit here about, early sociology and conflict theory and this whole idea of the initial division of labor, functionalist theory, how we divide into social roles in order to take care of certain functions, and then conflict theory, how does that division of labor into social roles create inequality between people? And not only is there inequality between people in the workforce, but also in the home. So you have a workforce that is divided into social roles, some of which are pay more than others. That workforce is also divided into social roles by gendered factors, such as what types of jobs do men take compared to which types of jobs do women make. As much as we want to state that we live in an equitable world, we still have the socialization of gender and gender roles, and then that is associated with the jobs that people take. So again, the system of care is also culturally dictated. So again, depending upon the culture you're socialized into and in what time, that is then associated with the division of labor, how the roles are divided, how each ones are paid, how each ones are rewarded, who's allowed to take that job, etc. Okay? So again, a good question to think about is, how should housework and market work and care work be divided and organized? Who should do what? Who's allowed to do what? Should it be equitable? Should it be divided between genders? There's just a lot of really great questions here. So the idea of paid work and entering the workforce has increased over time, again, since the rise of capitalism, the formalizing and bureaucratizing of society, the rise of technology. We've now entered this post-industrial capitalist system. Okay, and that's the society that we live in. We live in a society that has a capitalist economy, a democratic but also very social form of government. Okay, and all of these structure our lives. Again, in America, to survive, because you're born into a capitalist system, you don't necessarily have the choice to not go out and sell your labor to make enough money to be able to take care of yourself and others. But again, how our economy is structured and how our government is structured, again, these are all culturally produced. We're the ones who created a capitalist system. We're the ones who created the initial division of gender roles into males and females, in which males are providers and women were homemakers, that traditional attitudes. But we're also the ones in modern times deconstructing traditional attitudes and creating more egalitarian attitudes where we're all kind of deciding upon ourselves within families and also on a more grand cultural scale who's supposed to do what. But you have had this rise in paid work for women. And again, some of these factors have changed, a lot of the demographics that we talked about last week, such as people delaying having marriage and having less children. But it's also associated with how women entering the workforce then changes the dynamics of the family and changes the dynamics of the workforce itself. But what we found when it comes to income and things along those lines, that historically there has been no change for men. So when you guys talk about the labor revolution of women entering the workforce, it's a very one-sided, as your book says, kind of way of looking at it. So a lot of the social change that we'll talk about in this chapter, again, is oriented around females entering the workforce. And then females entering the workforce and the rise in women's rights and the rise in equity is then challenging our traditional ideals about how the family should be structured and who should do what role within the family, okay? So again, very dynamic processes going on. Again, segregation between the sexes. And again, this is your book's coined term, occupational gender segregation. You have to look at sex differences, biological differences between males, females, and intersex. And you have to take a biopsychosocial approach to doing things like job selection. So again, do women take nurturing roles more than men? And men take more math and science, like engineering roles, than females because that's somehow built into our genetics and the structure of our brain? Are women more developed when it comes to emotional parts of their brain and social parts of their brain? And men more developed when it comes to visual spatial parts of their brain? There's a lot of evidence to suggest that kind of thing. However, behavior itself and the way you think is actually, most of the differences between men and women are socialized. And even though there are these physical and the body differences and, some brain structure differences, but, how does that part of a girl's brain, for example, get more socialized than a male's brain? Is it because we socialize females to be more nurturing, more emotional, more social than we do men, that they end up more developed in that area of their brain? So how much of the differences between men and women, all the way up to the differences between our job choice, are associated with our actual biology, what we feel, what we think we should do, and then how much of it's associated with the socialization process and that we socialize men and women to take on specific roles of society. And so again, when we go back to the early sociology, they often say that the initial division of labor is between men and women. And you could argue there's some evolutionary psychological basis for that. And, I used to always think about things like, well, maybe there's a reason women taking homemakers, because what if a woman got pregnant and she couldn't go out and hunt or something? But the best trump card to that argument is this. Even if one woman was pregnant, not every woman there is going to be pregnant all at one time. Therefore, at least some women of different age groups would be able to go out and hunt. So even though a woman has to, might be pregnant, it may not be safe to travel for a few months or something, for all the other women in the tribe, they could easily go out and do it. So again, I don't like the idea of suggesting that, because of reproduction and other biological and evolutionary psychological reasons, there's like this division of labor into men and women, because again, women can take care of it just fine on themselves without ever having to have a man. So again, I like to kind of look more of a sociological perspective of gender role division and look at this socialization process and how we socialize males to do one thing, females to do another, and now you have the new addition of a third sex, intersex, which can then be subdivided based upon different aspects of genetics and chromosomes and hormones and genitalia. And so, and then intersex just throws a whole trump card into it, because if you have a blend of all these different things in different combinations, how is that associated with the jobs you end up taking? And so a lot more research needs to be there, but this is a really cool concept to delve into if you like a nice biopsychosocial approach to occupational gender segregation and how we divide into labor based upon genders. But regardless, historically, females did those homemaking, caretaking roles, men doing more of the providing roles. You saw that built into the family structure itself, the system of families, all the way through the 1950s and 60s, 70s, even parts of the 80s, and you still see a little bit of it now, even today. Not even just a little bit of it, quite a bit of it. You still see a lot of the traditional gender role expectations attached to males and females, for example. But females do continue to do care work as a job, and the majority of housework still to this day, despite women's rights. Women's jobs still pay less, and the book describes this as the devaluation of women's work due to their job selection itself. But again, why are they selecting jobs that, kind of match the traditional gender roles? How much of that's socialization and how much of that's male dominance and how much of that's sexism built into the workplace? And so a lot of good questions to be asking here. Segregation in the workforce is decreasing over time, but again, it still exists. Yes, women for the first time have access to be doctors and lawyers and access to be the president. However, has there been a woman president yet? Is Congress representative of females? Is the workforce representative of females? Are the Fortune 500 companies representative of females? And you're going to see the answer is still 100% no. Like, they're just not. It's just sexism still exists, the exclusion of women still exists, and that directly affects their pocketbooks. And again, if males are making more money than females, then when you look at different family types like single-parent households, which we're going to talk about in a second, you can see how that sets up the idea of the feminization of poverty and the 85% of poor people that are, have kids that are single parents tend to be female, okay? So the book also discusses the unpaid work primarily done by females in the house. So even though males and females are working about the same, still females are doing about 2 times the housework to men doing 1 time, 2 to 1. But it also says that's a big reduction from back in the day. So even though females are still doing, twice as much housework, that's unpaid work, including the child care and, taking care of the house and taking care of, anybody else that needs taken care of, and shopping and cooking and cleaning and all of those things. It has decreased a lot. It used to be about 7 to 1 if you go back to the 1950s and 60s, so says the book, okay? So again, I like to think about this concept of gender role social change in regards to kind of a shift from traditional gender role attitudes toward egalitarian attitudes. And traditional gender roles, again, defined as men being providers and females being homemakers. And egalitarian gender roles is there's a lot of work to do. Let's all just get together, communicate a plan, and get her done. Okay? So the book does state that Christians, Asians, Latinos, and heterosexuals tend to have slightly more traditional attitudes toward gender roles, and then whites, blacks, non-heterosexuals tend to have more egalitarian attitudes toward gender roles for various reasons. Again, it's all about culture, it's all about ideology, it's all about the socialization process. It's about the groups you identify with and how that's associated with culture. It's about whether or not you're having children, whether or not you're likely to have children. All kinds of dynamics going on. Regarding social change, again, as you might expect and hypothesize, the older cohorts tend to still have a little bit more traditional attitudes, even though The older cohorts in modern times are the ones who are really pushing for women's rights in the 60s and 70s. But again, old adages die hard. The younger cohorts tend to be more egalitarian in modern times. I love the concept of the work-family interface, which is kind of a social psychological approach to studying the interaction between the family, individuals in the family, and the workforce itself. And so again, as we've talked about a lot of times, as socioeconomic status increases, the work-family interface tends to be more positive because you have all the benefits, the privileges that socioeconomic status can grant you. However, even with socioeconomic status, many people experience the work-family conflict, which is as you might expect, that conflict between all your roles you have to do at work and then your role as someone of a member of a family. And when it's hard to achieve both goals of your work goals and your family goals, you often experience this conflict. And the gender role conflict, again, is similar to this, but we all have the gender roles, the attitudes and expectations society places upon males and females. And so, for example, if there's a female who is working a lot and not at home as much as they think they should be based upon socialized attitudes toward what a woman should do with their lives, they might often experience gender role conflict because, again, they're at one place, the workplace, where they think they should be somewhere else. This has a lot to do, actually, with why women spend more time with their kids in modern times than historically. Again, and a lot of that could be the guilt and shame, those psychological reasons attached to women thinking, that they're feeling shame and guilt because they think they should be home with their kids. So when they finally get to go home with their kids, they're actually spending way more time with their children than they ever did before they entered the workforce. So, and then general conflict for men, again, if a man is, socialized that they're supposed to be the provider, and yet here they are as the stay-at-home dad. Do they experience that guilt and shame, the stigmatization attached to that? And so I like to think about the intersection between socioeconomic status and family type, and that, again, 85% of poor single parents are female, and this is increasing. And if you look at the reasons for this, again, it goes down to that gender role socialization of who's expected to take the kids, when children are born, and then what's the association with that and poverty. And again, that's the association between family type and sex and the workforce or economics, and that women are more likely to be in poverty with children than men because women make less money due to stigmatization and job choice. And the book really has a cool concept that describes this as the motherhood penalty. Again, the loss of earnings after having children. And what it suggested is the ones who lose the most money are the ones who have the most, achievement in their jobs, like doctors and lawyers, because if a female has to take off time from work, and it could be, anywhere from, 3 weeks to 3 years, that could be a big loss of money. And so I see this with the coronavirus that we happened because, again, who quit their jobs when coronavirus happened? Was it the males or was it the females? And what you saw is that millions of females were dropping out of the workforce to take care of the children during this time. How much of that was due to the fact that, the husbands made more money and women's social expectations to take home with the kids while the men went to work kind of held firm during those times? So this is something to think about. To how do we help reduce this work-family conflict? Again, the 40-hour work week, paid overtime, child labor laws, a lot of this came, again, from the workers' rights movement of the proletariat trying to get some power over their lives from the bourgeoisie. This occurred in the late 1800s through the 1900s and is going on still to this day. So that helped a lot because it, at least gave people the socioeconomic status advantage if they had to work more. But it also gave, a boundary time to where there's boundaries between work and families so that the owners of, the places that people work cannot completely subject them to having to work all the time and having no time with their families. Ending discrimination for mothers is an excellent way. The book talks about what happens when females get pregnant and how they're pushed out of the workforce. And that's a really sad kind of thing to talk about. And then also paying females the same amount of money that increases socioeconomic status for their families. In modern times, there's some great research about companies taking steps to reduce the work-family conflict. And this is really a workforce approach to reducing burnout and helping people buy into their companies by believing that their companies and working for that company then sets them up to have all of their needs for their families taken care of, including time with them and enough money to do it. Men doing more work in modern times. Again, we still see that, that disparity between men and women, and a lot of that simply has to do with traditional attitudes. So men doing more work to balance that equation even more than it already is will help reduce stress on females. Government policies and procedures, your book discussed this, but again, things like the Paid Family Medical Leave Act and things along those lines, along with, the 40-hour work week, paid overtime, child labor laws, things like that, helping out with welfare systems, which, the book talks about a huge critique of the welfare system, and that when we started reducing welfare, that even made it worse for the pregnant mothers and people that have children. So again, how can the government step in and create some policies and procedures to make that happen? What about men's paid leave, when they have a baby, for example, things like that. Also, assistance with childcare and preschools. I really love the book's suggestions about, how could we already are involved in, K through 12. What would happen if we just added preschools onto the list? And that's a really interesting idea. And the book said it wouldn't even really cost that much money. I mean, we essentially already have the facilities, right? You just add a little bit of a wing here and there. I mean, that's totally naive way of thinking, of course. That was just for fun. But wouldn't that be great if, everyone had that access to preschool and childcare? Because in modern times, I don't know how anybody even affords to pay for childcare and, the mortgage, that's like $2,000, $3,000 a month right there. I mean, at a minimum. So very expensive world. But again, that's creating, more of that work-family conflict, and that, a lot of, in modern times, even families that have two parents, it's almost imperative that both people be working just to be able to take care of the families in modern times. So a lot of social change that we've seen over time. We'll talk more about that. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.